Mullally by Pat Lawlor. Read by Quinlivan. Guard Oswald Mullally had a fine physique and a no-nonsense air which instantly signalled that he was not your ordinary policeman. Blessed with a keen, inquiring mind, which could receive and store startling amounts of information, he was in turn handicapped by what his mind inquired into. The fact that the data remained sorted for approximately 30 seconds didn't help either. He had only been in the supermarket a few minutes and had already calculated how much honey was on the shelf, multiplied it by the number of supermarkets in town, and had reached the conclusion that there was 55 kilos of the thick yellow stuff in the vicinity. His brow furrowed. Could there really be enough of these little stripy insects around to fill all those jars and still have enough left for themselves? Similar questions assailed him as he passed the baked beans. Where did they come from? Was there such a thing as a bean farm? Or a bean mountain? Shrugging resignedly, he went to the checkout and paid for the tin of Andrews the Sarge wanted. Now there's a queer one, Guard Mullally was thinking seconds before he found himself in the air. He had been thoroughly investigating the ingredients listed on the Andrews tin, and had reached magnesium sulfate, when with a blind desire to obtain assistance from the chemist across the street, he had stepped into the path of the car containing 5 escaping ex-supermarket shelf stackers. He sighed as he twirled graciously 20 feet above the street, supposing rightly that he would have to go to hospital. And he hadn't taken his mother's advice about always wearing clean underwear in case he was knocked down. Or indeed up, as in his case. He was just commencing his final spin before landing when he saw the contents of the Sarge's tin scattered across the tarmac. He was in real trouble now. He set off downwards to land with a thump. Uniforms obviously suited him, as even in white pyjamas and matching bandages, Guard Mullally was attracting attention. Unknown to himself, he had been the cause of a bitter dispute between Nurses O'Brien and Murphy as to who would take care of him. This altercation was halted only by the arrival of the doctor, who duly proceeded with their help to give him a more than a thorough examination. And so Guard Mullally awoke to find 3 faces peering at him, and what was even more disconcerting, 3 pairs of hands wandering about his person. Shocked and disorientated, he nevertheless knew he had to continue his investigations, and so the questions had to be asked. "Honey," he croaked. "Yes, darling." 3 voices cooed as one. The nurses blushed. The doctor didn't, mainly because he was a rich brown colour to start with. "Nurse," he barked in embarrassment, "sedation, please." Unfortunately, he didn't specify which nurse, and 2 large doses of tranquilizer coursed through Mullally's body. These failed to quieten him. "Underwear," he breathed. The nurses reacted, and 2 more shots of tranquilizer followed the first. They were shocked. How did he know they weren't wearing underwear, as they'd just left the linen closet with the 2 student doctors from the Punjab? "Bean, farm, mountains, white powder." It all came out in a rush. "Nurses, more sedation, please." 3 syringes emptied this time. The doctor was dumbfounded and knew he had to run. This man knew it all. About the Bachelor Bean brothers, their farm in the mountains, the white powder. His plan to flee was foiled before it began as he saw the squad car turn in the gate. He made a speedy, if imprudent decision, and grabbing Guard Mullally's trolley, he made for the elevator. The Sarge hadn't wanted to visit Mullally. In fact, he never wanted to see him again. But there was the tin of Andrews, and the change from the 50 he'd given him. Besides, he might see a doctor who would advise him about his indigestion. He couldn't have been more wrong. Not alone did he not find any staff, but patients were scarce too. It seemed as if everyone who wasn't totally comatose had left the building. He cursed. Mullally had messed up again. He continued to prowl the near-deserted wards until he beheld a heart-warming sight. On a bedside locker, along with a spoon and a glass of water, stood a tin of the longed-for Andrews. Hastily, he poured the powder into the water and gulped it down, and stood waiting for it to take effect. The wait was short, and the effect was shattering. The floor turned to cotton wool, and thousands of firecrackers exploded all around him. All symptoms of indigestion had left him, as did all symptoms of everything else. If he had been into flower power in his youth, the Sarge might have been happy about all of this. But as he hadn't, he wasn't. Floating from the room, he was oblivious to the titters coming from beneath the blankets of the bed he had just left. Mrs. Mullally could hardly believe that this stupid man had consumed all the Valium prescribed for her, and which, unknown to the staff, she had been mashing and concealing in the Andrews tin. The Sarge drifted like a rudderless ship into the courtyard at the rear of the hospital, where, without really trying, he located the missing patients and staff. He bobbed about, absorbing snippets of conversation. There was a doctor on the 4th floor, it seemed, who, for reasons best known to himself, intended to tip a heavily comatose guard Mullally onto the yard. In his normal state, the Sarge might have seen drawbacks to this plan, but at the moment he couldn't see any. Opinion among the audience was divided, and seemed to be split mainly down occupational lines. The patients, perhaps because they were bored, were in favour of a drop, while the staff, possibly perceiving extra work, were advising cancellation of the event. There was another group whose members desperately wanted to see Guard Mullally in flight. Prominent among these were the 2 doctors from the Punjab, Nurses O'Brien and Murphy, and 5 bandaged ex-supermarket shelf stackers. It was as he floated over to lend encouragement to the S groups that the Sarge wobbled into a squad of heavily armed members of the special branch, who, wrongly presuming he was clued in, asked him what was happening. He told them all about Mullally, and exhausted but pleased with himself, he bobbed back to watch the action. The armed men looked determined as they moved into position, took careful aim, and fired as one at their hapless target. Fortunately for Guard Mullally, they missed him, but a ricocheting bullet did graze the doctor, knocking him unconscious for just long enough to allow the saner members of staff to retrieve the recumbent law officer. The Sarge, happily, did not witness this disappointing event, as he had passed out. It was 4 weeks before Guard Mullally opened his eyes to find he was a hero, accredited with wiping out crime in the Republic. He was involved in thousands of cases, ranging from drug manufacturing in the mountains to unseemly goings-on in health board linen closets. His name was on every TV and radio station. 4 RTE journalists were neck and neck in the race to produce a biography, while 4 more were struggling to finish a screenplay. So profligate were the articles, stories, and letters in the newspapers that the printing presses overheated and seized up. Life was great for Garda Mullally, because as there was little crime, he had nothing to do but sit at his new computer, which actually helped him mix up his observations more quickly than he could do himself. Also, the Sarge wasn't around to torment, as he was apparently on a tour of Iran. Mr. and Mrs. Mullally could never have dreamt that their up till now inept son would have such an effect on the world. They were overjoyed at his success, and watched in wonder as his fame spread far beyond their native shores. Even the British tabloids were taking an interest. Photographers deserted their normal duties, leaving unimportant celebrities and drunken pop stars wondering what they had done right to be left so isolated. Members of the royal family in the UK ran amok without fear from Land's End to John O'Groats, and Charles and Camilla frolicked with abandon on Wimbledon Common, and when they were finished, made inquiries as to who was responsible for their newfound anonymity. The answer came back: Mullally.